Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the Corporate Affairs Africa inaugural webinar that is co-organized by GlobeScan and Corporate Affairs Africa. My name is Sam Apata, the Executive Convener of Corporate Affairs. Corporate Affairs Africa is based in Johannesburg. I'm going to hand over to Mahlodi, the director of Speakingdom, and she is going to be our program director for today and equally the moderator. And she will speak more about what Corporate Affairs Africa's mandates and some of the things that we are doing within the corporate affairs space. So, and of course, also do a bit of introduction about GlobeScan and Anneke, for the director of GlobeScan Africa, also is going to be presenting and facilitating this session. And she will speak more about GlobeScan Africa. And I'm sure that many of you here already know about what GlobeScan Africa does. But without any further ado, I yield the mic to our amiable, highly experienced moderator, Mahlodi. Over to you.
Wow, with that introduction, I don't have a choice but to show up as amiable and highly experienced. Thank you so much, Sam, for that introduction and for setting the context for us this afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues, and everybody that has made time to join us today. We'll be together for the next 1 hour. And as Sam has introduced, my name is Mahlodi Kgatle, and I am the director at Speakingdom. And we champion impact through the transformative power of communication, particularly through public speaking, which one can say as corporate affairs professionals, this is one of those skills that you cannot go without. But today's not about that. It really is about understanding corporate affairs in the African landscape and how differently does our world fare to the global north. So, a little bit of background about Corporate Affairs Africa. Corporate Affairs Africa is committed to facilitating professional connection and industry excellence through a diverse array of summits, conferences, sustainability initiatives, training programs, awards, as well as publications. And while I mention the awards segment of what Corporate Affairs Africa does, there is going to be an awards and gala dinner happening on the 9th of August, right here in South Africa. And the aim really is that Corporate Affairs Africa wants to really platform and celebrate the excellence of corporate affairs professionals throughout Africa. I myself have had a look at some of the nominees in the various award categories, and I do want to encourage everyone that's on the call to join this auspicious occasion of awarding excellence, particularly in leadership, in corporate social investment programs, as well as corporate affairs. So, if you would like to know more about these programs, you're more than welcome to email sam at corporateaffairs.co.za. So, really, it's a platform that's dedicated to empowering leaders in this profession through unparalleled networking opportunities, professional development initiatives, as well as sustainability platforms, and ultimately to recognize this field or these professionals in this arena. Today, like I mentioned, we're talking about what this looks like. What does corporate affairs look like in the African context? And we're joined by Anneke Greyling, who heads up GlobeScan in Africa. And I see she's smiling as she's impressed with my pronunciation of her name, but I'm glad that I could get it right, Anneke. And with over 25 years of experience, Anneke helps organizations to better understand their stakeholders. She's well positioned as she works very closely with her clients to protect their reputation and their trust. So she's the lead at the Africa office at GlobeScan Incorporated. GlobeScan is a global stakeholder intelligence and engagement consultancy. And really, what they specialize in is providing insights and advisory. And this empowers organizations to build trust, sustainability, as well as engagement. And through the work that they do, they then equip clients with insights to navigate this constantly evolving and shifting societal and stakeholder expectations. And they then use evidence based strategies to reduce the risks and to create value for organizations. And what we'll be talking about in this next hour is going through insights from a survey that will help us understand what challenges corporate affairs experience, particularly in Africa. And in this webinar, we'll unpack what these key points are and what are the opportunities that we can leverage to position corporate affairs practitioners for the future of this function. There will be question and answer, and I believe that Anneke is also happy to take some questions, during her presentation. And if you do have those, you're welcome to raise your hand, or you are welcome to wait until the end of the webinar and just show by raise of hand if you do have any questions. Like I did say, if you want more information on Corporate Affairs Africa, please email sam@corporateaffairs.co.za to join this movement of corporate affairs excellence. With that said, Anneke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mahlodi and Slody. I didn't get it right. My bad. Sorry about that. Thank you for an unbelievable introduction. I am much appreciative of that. And yes, welcome to everybody on the call. I have quickly looked through the participants who we have around the table today, and I recognize a number of names. So great to reconnect with all of you. And yes, today what we would like to do is, to a degree, juxtapose Africa, corporate affairs in Africa vis-a-vis the global view and status quo of corporate affairs. Because what we have realized is that the global south is very different. I'm talking to the converted on this call, but the global south is very different to the global north. We hear a different drum. We have a different set of circumstances, and we approach it very differently. And I'm going to show a few proof points to that effect, and then we can have a discussion, because what the crux of our conversation really is today is to understand if this is the landscape in the global south for corporate affairs teams. Are we ready to deal with that? And how do we need to maybe shape shift a little bit to actually deal with it, or are we actually okay? So I'm going to put all of those questions out there, and let's see what it brings. I am, however, going to flip through a number of, just a quick few slides about GlobeScan. I am not going to repeat the introduction because I will not be able to do justice to it. So just bear with me there. So this is where our offices are. We're very fortunate to have colleagues across the world, and it really brings, it makes it easy to localize global trends. So that is the only point I'd like to highlight there. This is what we do. We do a lot of bespoke and own research. So on the insight side, we generate a lot of thought leadership and so on. But then we are also a consultancy, and these are the 7 areas. We really focus on taking it from understanding the landscape to crafting strategies to also influencing. And you can see this sort of the 7 key service areas that we focus on. They are often highly interrelated. Like for instance, you would not speak about reputation and trust building without speaking about stakeholder engagement and activation, and even thought leadership and advocacy. So they are very interrelated, but and that's how we approach it. We like to hear what is needed, and then we respond to that. We do a lot of thought leadership, and we are very privileged to partner with some of the leading lights when it comes to either sustainability or corporate affairs. And I'm going to share today some insights from our joint work that we do with the Corporate Affairs Academy that is attached to the Said Business School at Oxford University. And it's a global study. So that's what this is built around. It's the insights of corporate affairs practitioners from around the world. And as I said, the discussion agenda really is two main points. I'm going to set the scene, and I'm going to focus a little bit on what are the risks and the opportunities, the big picture that we have to deal with every day, and how do the world, in terms of this, for Africa, is different to that of the global north, and there are distinct differences. And then the second part is, are we ready as a function to respond to this ever-changing world? So just about the survey, it is a global survey. It's probably the biggest survey of this kind. I know there are a few other surveys, Deloitte and so on. They interview a much smaller number of people. We are very fortunate to over the 7 years that we've been doing this, to build up a really strong voice of corporate affairs practitioners from across the world. So we were nearly 300 people who participated in this survey, 26 from Africa. And my call, just a little side note here, please next time participate in this. We post it on LinkedIn. We will hopefully ask Sam to help us with amplification through the Corporate Affairs Africa network. But it's essential for us to get more insights, more feedback from Africa so that we can really delve into it. But we had 26 people from Africa respond. It's a very high-level set of participants, people reporting into the board, the CEO, and so on, experienced people, 51 countries. So really robust. And I think we had 12 participants from 12 African countries participating this year, which is a good number to have. So let's get into the risks and the opportunities. The first thing is the risks. What are the biggest, or seen as the biggest, risks for global businesses over the next 2 years? And on the slide, you can see 3 years worth of data, and you can see that at the top, without any competition, really sits geopolitical risk. It's not a surprise. I think everybody expected that. But what was interesting is that we saw that the impact of AI and technology has become a really serious risk for business through the lens of corporate affairs directors. What we've interestingly enough also seen is that the whole issue of the impact of macroeconomic issues like tariffs and so on really diminished, which we were surprised at, because I don't think the tariff war and everything related to that is behind us. But in the moment we ask people to prioritize geopolitical risk and then the impact of AI. And if we look at this across the regions in the world, we can see that there's a bit of a different pattern. Across all regions, geopolitical risk is the most important. But interestingly enough, in North America and in Africa, we see that macroeconomic issues are the second most important risk that they believe needs managing. And then in Africa comes the impact of AI and so on. So there's the first point of variation. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. We know that we are often at the receiving end of global economic issues and geoeconomics, if I can call it that. So not a surprise. If we look at how these risks in terms of geopolitical risk and climate change, because when we started out in 2020, climate change was the #1 risk identified by everybody. And over time, that has shifted. And we can see how it has shifted over time across the various regions. And what I find interesting, and at the end of this conversation, I'd love your feedback on this, or just your thoughts on this, the fact that geopolitical risk for us, our corporate affairs practitioners, is seen to be diminishing. It's less important, but it is still the #1 risk. When we turn to opportunities, what is interesting is that there sits innovation, digitization, and AI. So while it is a risk on the one hand, it is definitely seen as a major opportunity for business and also for the corporate affairs function. And then, of course, true to ourselves, the second most important opportunity is stakeholder engagement and building trust with our stakeholders. That is globally, and in a more regional breakdown, we can see that the pattern is quite similar. The only place where we do see a difference is that Europe is a little bit different. Interesting that they focus on stakeholder engagement and building trust as the second most important priority. The Americans are worried, or not the Americans, my Canadian colleagues will be very horrified for me to call them Americans, but the people living in North America believes that having a stable global economic and political system is a big opportunity. It does say something. It's probably driven by a perception that the US feel that they've stabilized everything, but we'll leave that there. So you can see there's a bit of a different set of opportunities. But in Africa, what is important is that second one also, sustainable growth together with stakeholder engagement. And we know that those two areas, those two opportunities are key levers when it comes to what we do every day, and that is building trust with our stakeholders, protecting the reputation of our business, and making sure that we deliver on the purpose of our various organizations. When we turn to ESG in particular, we can see that there is a downward curve for climate change and mitigation. This question is that what are the top ESG issues for your organization? And, when we looked at the global trend, one's heart sinks when you see that the climate challenge is just dropping down in priority. But what is interesting is that Africa completely bucks this trend in the sense that it is still the top priority by far, and it is a strong priority. What is also interesting and not surprising is the fact that opposed to the global picture, where 15% of our respondents said that community development is a priority for their companies and their businesses, 35% of corporate affairs practitioners in Africa listed that as the second most important priority for the organization. And then this question is from a bit of a different angle. It's trying to understand in the ESG world, when we talk about ESG, and we want to understand in terms of reputational risk to your business, how do they rank? And we can see that in 2025, globally, if we look at that top graph, that governance overtook both environment and social, which is interesting. I think it's a result of what we are facing in the world today. And what is very interesting is that is very strongly driven by the global south, Africa and Latin America in particular. And you can see there that in terms of seeing governance as a key risk to your business is very high. So an area that we are focusing on probably, hopefully, quite a bit. So this is the lay of the land. We can see that geopolitical issues are uncertainty is a great concern. We know that AI is both a concern and an opportunity. We know that stakeholder engagement is important, governance is important, and so on. But let's see. I'm going to now share with you some perspectives on the corporate affairs function, and are we ready to respond to what we believe the world is looking like out there. So let's look at the status quo. This question we didn't ask in 2026, but we did ask it in 2025, and it's always a good starting point. It shows us, if we think about all our responsibilities as corporate affairs practitioners, which of these areas have become either more or less prominent in your role over the past 3 years. And we can see for Africa that stakeholder engagement, understanding, knowing who your stakeholders are, mapping them, and then managing the reputation is our 3 top areas that has become more important. In other markets, other regions, it's looking ever so slightly different. We see that Latin America, very similar to Africa, I think in terms of our challenges and potentially our life stages of the function, we are in a very similar situation. Also the developmental stage where we are as continents are very similar. So we see stakeholder engagement and understanding our stakeholders as our priorities. We then, in this year's survey, we asked the question because we wanted to understand, okay, we now know where you're focusing, but we want to understand below the hood. How do you feel about the approach that you are taking to corporate affairs? Because it's a big debate. You know, there's not a right and a wrong answer here. There's probably a spectrum, and you can put yourself somewhere on that spectrum. But we do know that on the spectrum, as you go from you have absolutely nothing and it sits in a silo, and you have individuals or small teams addressing some of these aspects, whether it is stakeholder engagement, whether it is thought leadership, crisis management, whatever, in a silo, right through to the other side of the the spectrum where you have a corporate affairs strategy that is fully embedded in the business strategy. So there's not a separate strategy. There might be like an operational plan or something like that, but everything that you do is so embedded in the business strategy that it's completely aligned. So you have this spectrum. And what was interesting is to see where we are. There are globally 18% of our corporate affairs practitioners indicated that they believe they have a corporate affairs strategy that is fully embedded in the overall business strategy. And it's very similar to Africa. That's why I didn't put any red data on this slide. So 1 in 5 corporate affairs practitioners in Africa believe that they have a fully embedded strategy. But where we do see something interesting is that where only 35% of practitioners believe they have a formal strategy that includes sub-strategies, we see a higher occurrence or prevalence of that in Africa. So there's an early sense when you look at this data. There's an early sense that in Africa there's a tendency to have a more formalized, slightly more integrated approach to corporate affairs. And then on to the next slide, which is the impact, because now we know we have a slightly more integrated approach in Africa to the rest of the world. And I must just say that I always personally feel quite proud, because when we are in global conversations, it's often the African conversation that can lead quite easily when it comes to this is what we see as best practice. And I see it with the clients that we do. They are a focus on integrated strategies. And what this then creates is that you are able to create and protect business value. So we ask this question on a tracking basis to understand what is that percentage of people who believe that the corporate affairs department or team has a great impact on creating and protecting business value. And we see it's quite high. It's nearly 8 in 10 that believe that they have a high impact. It's ever so slightly lower in Africa, but it's not significant. So I'm not going to make too much of that. You will get some clue to why that might be a case, why there's a perception that the corporate affairs team isn't making the impact that they believe they should be making when I get to a later section. But yeah, I think it's great to see that corporate affairs feel that they are in the mix. They're protecting business value. Many years ago, and I'm saying 20, 30 years ago, a corporate affairs leader in South Africa once said to me, he hates the perception that the corporate affairs team, they're the team for the champagnes and canapes. I know that those days are long gone, and that corporate affairs plays an essential role in creating and protecting business value. Not only making sure that crises are dealt with quickly and efficiently, it's a much broader, function and impact that you have. So where are you creating and protecting business value? And it's interesting that, for instance, forecasting in terms of risk and crisis management and political risk has really jumped to the top this year, and I don't think there's any surprises in that, because I'm sure that many of you had to write an opinion piece or a brief to the executive committee on what is the impact of, for instance, the Middle East crisis and those kind of things. So this forecasting dimension of corporate affairs has really stepped into the fore as something that is growing across the world. In Africa, we see exactly the same feeling that is where you are increasingly playing a role. And then, of course, the second one, protecting and promoting the reputation of the business is really an important area of adding value. Then if we look at reducing risk for the business, the areas where corporate affairs practitioners believe they play the biggest role, and this, if you think about the previous bit of data that I shared with you, this bears it out again, that it is around risk reduction and capital, reputational capital protection and building reputational capital, where the corporate affairs teams play a really important role. And then in the third place there, if we look at adding a license to operate and building trust with your external stakeholders, that's a third area that's a very important area. But if we step back and when we analyze this, we often do that. These are sort of the granular points that people shared with us, corporate affairs practitioners shared with us. But if we step back, the main area where corporate affairs contribute in building value is around trust and reputation, and then assisting with policy and risk mitigation. So I asked the question about, how are we doing? Do we need to change? What is our impact? I shared with you that what the areas of value creation is. And we've been tracking that for 7 years now. And in the 2026 survey, we thought we'll ask a new question. We'll again try and get under the hood and ask the question about, so how do you actually understand how you deliver success? How do you measure your impact when it comes to the function? And what was very interesting is that I want to say only, because I think this is a tough nut, but only 49% of corporate affairs practitioners across the world indicated that they have a formal measure of assessing their impact and their success. We were not surprised when we saw this, because we do know that impact measurement is a difficult area, but still, 49% said that, yep, we do something. 41 said, no, we don't. And 11 didn't know whether they were doing it. So I want to say it's a 50-50 issue in terms of measuring impact. And then our follow-up question was, and how do you measure it? What do you use to understand what your impact is? And the top of the pops there is that media performance is still a key metric to the corporate affairs function, followed by a formal reputation or trust tracking measure. And then equally important is those more informal stakeholder sentiment barometers, those organizations with the ability to engage stakeholders. They have a platform and they can come back and they can capture the outcome of conversations, of engagements, and so on. So you can see there are some measurements that are being used. Media are still top of the pops. What was interesting for us, looking at Africa in particular, is that yes, media performance is very important. 92% of African respondents said we use media performance as a measure, but then 83% said we have a formal way of tracking our trust, our level of trust with our stakeholders, or monitoring our reputation. But it's a more formalized way of understanding your impact. And then, of course, the third one, again, very high on capturing stakeholder sentiment in a more informal and ongoing way. So this is how the metrics unfold. So after asking all of these questions, we then had a section on so what? So do you think that the corporate affairs function as it stands today is able to meet the challenge? So we asked the question. I don't have to guess about it. I don't have to speculate about it. I can quite confidently say that globally, most corporate affairs practitioners believe that the function needs some revision. 17% of them said radical revision. We see that in Africa, and I mentioned to you earlier on that there's an indication that in Africa we get a lot of things right. There is a perception in Africa that we are getting it more right than the global north, which I think is often something that we don't believe about ourselves, but I'm a firm believer that we often set the trend. And here is hard evidence that not a majority, but a strong number of people, corporate affairs practitioners in Africa, believe we're on the right track with how we actually run our business, what our model is, etc., etc. So then we also wanted to understand, okay, but what drives this? If you are saying 74% of corporate affairs practitioners worldwide saying, yes, we need to revise, we need to think about how we do our business. What is driving that? And no surprise, the two top drivers of this sense to want to change, want to reinvent ourselves. Not that I'm not saying we never reinvent ourselves, because I think there's constant reinvention, but it's as if there is a moment to say, we've got two really big challenges that we have to deal with, and we have to revise how we deal with it, is geopolitical volatility and regulatory challenge. So that changes, so that uncertainty that we have in the exterior world, together with the, let's call it, the challenges of both the challenges and the opportunities being presented by AI and other communications technology. So you can see it's very much a AI technology piece that is making corporate affairs practitioners sit up and think, sure, we have to decode what is happening around us, whether it's geopolitical issues, geoeconomical issues. There's a lot of movement and moving parts. We have to deal with that, and we have this the possibility of using AI as a communication technology. So those were the two big drivers. And we can see that in Africa, 31% of it was driven by AI. So AI is something that is important and a key thing for corporate affairs practitioners in Africa. So the final section, 2-3 slides, and then we can have a chat about it, is what do you believe, or what what are the things that we need to change as corporate affairs practitioners off the back of these questions. And it was interesting. This slide to me spoke volumes. I mentioned up front that I believe that, and we see it and we experience it, that corporate affairs teams in Africa have good strategies. They feel far more confident about their overall approach towards how they run their business and so on. And we can see that globally, 35% of corporate affairs practitioners, top of the pops for them. We need a clearer strategy, clearer focus, better priorities, and so on, opposed to 13 in Africa. So clearly something that corporate affairs practitioners in Africa, we've got that sorted. We know what we need to do, where we need to do it, etc., and we have a plan backing that up. But when we go down the list of priorities, operating model in Africa, it was also around about 30% of corporate affairs practitioners saying we need to think about our operating model, governance, and our internal alignment. And this comes mostly from corporate affairs practitioners who believe that their function isn't integrated enough into the business. So they're still on that journey of becoming really embedded in the strategy of the business, very good cross-functional alignment and so on. So we see that is the what sits behind the second most important aspect that was identified as an area for revision. But what is important here is number 3, the impact measurement, the data that's available, and the AI capabilities is something that was seen as an area for revision by 25% globally, but 40% in Africa. And I would like to make a bit of a provocative statement, and that is, I believe that the gap that we saw between the global view about how corporate affairs delivers impact to the business was higher globally than Africa, is simply because we don't at this point have the ability, or we perceive we don't have the ability to really measure our impact. We don't have the right data, and we are potentially not leveraging AI to the best that we could. And that brings me to the last point for this sort of section on where we should change, and that was a question around AI preparedness. And this is very much through the lens of corporate affairs, asking, how prepared do you feel to manage a deep fake or AI-driven misinformation incident? We wanted to really box it in, and we wanted to make it very, very specific about what AI threat are we talking about. And you can see that across the world, 1 in 5 feel that they are prepared. We see that it's ever so slightly lower in Africa. What is very interesting to me is that it's very low in North America. I was quite surprised at that. But yes, it is something that clearly is an area that I think all of us are grappling with as a challenge. And we saw that AI is a big driver of either change, or it's a threat, or it's an opportunity for corporate affairs. So I'm going to now get to the total final session. Sorry, I see I've got 10 minutes left. I'll go quickly through this. So we've now spoken about what is the status quo, what are our threats and our risks and opportunities? Where do we believe we need to change? But what is, I don't want to call it the magic recipe, but if we take 300 corporate affairs, senior corporate affairs practitioners across the globe, and we ask them the question, what are the foundations? What are the single most important thing that you could do to ensure that that your function is future fit? We have this. And you can see the same things are coming up more over and over. We have strategic planning and direction is a key area where we need to be successful. Again, Africa, a lower reading, because I think it is again something where we're probably closer to getting it right than the rest of the world. But we can see the adoption and integration of AI and technology is something that Africa is higher. It's the most important thing in Africa to do when we talk about ensuring that the corporate affairs function is future fit. And that really is the end of my presentation. Sorry, I think I overran by a bit, but love to hear if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Anneke. Thank you. That was quite insightful. I do have some of my own questions, but let me open it up to our guests this afternoon, please. Colleagues, you're welcome to show us by raising your hand if you'd like to engage with this insightful research. I'm not seeing any hands up yet, but perhaps, Anneke, as we wait for our colleagues to prepare their questions, you did mention that there's an opportunity for the corporate affairs professionals to participate in the next survey. So, what is the frequency of the survey? How often do you do it? Is it annual, quarterly?
Yes, it's annual. It's annual. We always do it in the first quarter, sort of February, March, at the beginning of the year. And then we do a number of events off the back of that. So the full report, because it is an extensive survey, someone once said to me, when you do the survey, it's like a learning moment because it covers so many topics and so on. So the full report will be published in the first week of July, and I will make sure that Sam receives a copy of it and can distribute it. We will also be posting it out to all the respondents and to our wider network. So I'm sure that many of you are already part of our wider network. We will be posting it on LinkedIn as well. So we'll make sure that, and there's a lot more in that overall report to what I've covered here.
Wonderful. We really look forward to engaging on that survey. I'm not sure if it's just my screen, but I can't see any hands. Are there any hands from our colleagues who would like to engage Anneke? I mean, we have her on the call and she can really expand on some of those questions that you might be having. So if you do have your hand up, you're welcome to actually just unmute yourself and ask the question.
That's all good, I think.
Okay, but maybe
we
I'll be selfish. I did have two questions, so I was holding back in the hopes that our audience might also use this opportunity to engage. But I found it quite interesting, Anneke, that you pointed out these regional differences between ourselves and the rest of the global north, and particularly on slide 28. You were looking at the factors that are reshaping the roles in corporate affairs. If you were to summarize for us on the call, what would you say are the top three power skills
Mm,
that the future corporate affairs practitioner must have? That these are
mm-hmm.
non-negotiable power skills to operate in this field.
So, um, hmm, I would say, the first, a first power skill is what I call sense making, and that is just an ability to see the data and the implications of it. If I say data, I'm not talking about a survey. I'm talking about whatever piece of information, occurrence, event that is happening in the exterior world, and your ability to make sense of it. In another piece of work that we've done 2 or 3 years ago, we asked CEOs the question, what do they expect of their corporate affairs team? And one of the key things was sense making. I need the corporate affairs team to tell me, yes, this has happened, and it has the following implication for us. Because if you think about what happened in the Middle East, it had an impact not only on the oil price, but it disrupted supply chains. It really it created turmoil that was completely new to us. I think the generation before us, or 2 generations before us, lived through that in the Second World War, and suddenly we had something quite similar to that to deal with. So sense making, definitely the first one. And then the other power skill that I believe is diplomat. It's a key power skill for a corporate affairs practitioner. Not only external diplomacy in terms of building trust and relationships with your external stakeholders, but also internally. We see that corporate affairs teams who are able to really demonstrate internally that they're a valuable team. They are, and that you can do through, well, delivering impact, but also making sure that your colleagues understand that when something is being negotiated about a site of an operation, it might be worthwhile to take the corporate affairs representative with you into that conversation, because they look at it from a different perspective. They have a different view and they can contribute differently. So internal diplomacy to make sure that you have good relationships, well-aligned relationships with your internal constituents, I think is important. The third one, that's a tricky one. I think AI. We are all challenged by just being able to really leverage AI. It could probably, in terms of the data that I shared with you, that should be the top superpower that we should all have. I still believe that there are some other softer touch superpowers that we should have, but AI. And being able to leverage AI and technology, because it is changing rapidly. I see Maxine has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you, Maxine. You're welcome to go for it. Maxine?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, loud and
Yes.
clear.
Perfect. Maxine, I'll just do a quick intro. I'm Maxine Singaram, and I work at SALC in the PR and digital communications function. I just have a question. You mentioned that corporate affairs professionals are struggling to manage deepfake or AI-driven misinformation. What do you think some of the reasons are for that? Is it because of a lack of strategy in place, or is there a lack of tools available in, I'm just thinking in the South African context. I think my question is, why do you think that is? And then maybe if you can assist or provide some solutions or tools that can be used for us to manage that more effectively.
I think it's a combination of strategy and access to tools. And just simply, it is a very new tool that is available to corporate affairs. There are a number of solutions, companies who do, say, for argument's sake, we know social media tracking. I'm sure that you're very familiar with that. Those tools, they are constantly evolving, but I think it is really at this stage, you can't really call it a fear factor, because I don't think it's complete a fear factor. I just think it is, most corporate affairs teams are still grappling to get their strategy and their protocols in place and understand just their own skill set. The conversations that I've had is more about skill set and using those things.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a combination of strategy and skill set. It's quite new. And I do think there's a little bit of fear around it with a lot of professionals. So I think for me, one of the things that I really want to go and look up now is just some of those strategies and tools beyond the social listening tools and stuff that we have. What can be used to scan and find that information, and some of the strategies to counter that information that AI is generating about our organization. I think I gave myself homework there.
And please, when you get to some good answers, please share it back.
Yeah, I was actually doing some searching on Google and on LinkedIn. So I'm finding some good articles around it. So definitely in the next session, I'll put it in the chat or something for the rest of the people that join.
Oh, excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maxine.
Thank you, Maxine. And I suppose what you're speaking to is the evolving nature of the digital landscape. Today it's deep fake. Tomorrow it's going to be something else. And it speaks to one of those power skills that Anneke spoke about, just being AI savvy, not just AI from artificial intelligence point of view, but from generative AI. These things are evolving at a rapid pace that we sort of need to develop that competency as part of what we do already as corporate affairs practitioners, so that we're not caught chasing the trend, but almost able to anticipate and have the comfort to deal with whatever the new scope or the new challenge or the new technology presents to us. So thank you, Maxine. That was quite a great one. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with in the next session. So colleagues, we've reached the end of our session today. But just as Maxine has mentioned, we have another webinar on the 29th of July. And in this one, Anneke will be joined by another colleague to discuss with us then how do we build trust and resilience, and how do we use assessment as a key to success in building trust. So do join us on the 29th of July for that webinar. It will be at the same time slot. And if you're wondering how to register for that, you can just send an email to sam@corporateaffairs.co.za. And with that said, thank you so much, Anneke. That was quite insightful. I do believe that as African practitioners in the corporate affairs space, we're a little bit more empowered by understanding what our colleagues are doing in the other side of the world. With that said, please follow Corporate Affairs Africa on LinkedIn, as well as all the other social media platforms, Facebook as well as Instagram. And you can join our LinkedIn group. It's called Corporate Affairs. So just look out for us on LinkedIn and follow us. And I mentioned this earlier on, but I cannot close without coming back here. On the 9th of August, we will be honoring excellence in corporate affairs. And the theme for this awards and gala dinner is honor and elegance, recognizing leadership excellence, impact, and sustainability. So do join us for a night of celebration, recognition, thought leadership, and networking. But until then, let's meet again on the 29th of July. Thank you so much, colleagues. Have a wonderful afternoon further.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Mahlodi. Thank you, Anneke, and thank you to all the colleagues that joined us.